What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we're back with another Grotsmas detachment. It was a double release today. We had both Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, and I think what we're going to do right now is talk about Chaos Knights first, because I think their detachment is more interesting, and I'm more excited about it. We'll probably talk about Knights at some point in the future. I'm not sure when it's going to be, but we'll see. As I say in all these videos, I'm going to keep making them as long as people watch them, so please drop a like on the video, subscribe on the channel, share it around all the YouTube things, and let's talk about the Iconoclast Fiefdom, this brand new detachment for Chaos Knights. Now, whenever we're talking about these single detachment factions, I think it's important to make sure that we understand what we're losing by swapping detachments, because it's very easy to conflate the previous detachment that the faction had access to and their army abilities, essentially. While Chaos Knights will retain their Harbingers of Dread auras, so that's -1 to battle shock checks from battle round 1 onwards, and +1 to wound against battle shocked enemies, -1 to be hit by battle shocked enemies, and their super heavy walker mechanic. What they will lose by dropping into this new detachment is their Forged in Terror ability. This forces enemies to take a battle shock check if they are below their starting strength, if they're within 12 inches of a Chaos Knight. And to be honest, I forgot what this was and I had to look it up. This does not come up very often. I think these abilities were done kind of dirty by the rules commentary documents. It was ruled by Games Workshop for whatever reason that they do not stack with standard battle shock checks. I think if it could force multiple battle shock checks, it might be okay. But realistically, this is not a very good detachment ability, so I think people are excited to be getting something different. You are losing a couple important stratagems. Things like Diabolic Bulwark for a 4+ invulnerable save against enemy ranged attacks, Terror Shades to do mortal wounds when enemies fail battle shock checks, or Dread Hounds to get sustained hits 1 and potentially critical 5-ups on your War Dogs. And not to mention the fact, Knights of Shade, the important one, the ability to walk through walls with up to either 2 War Dogs or doing it for free with a Titanic unit. Those are all gone. Knights of Shade probably the biggest one here, because moving War Dogs through walls is kind of the big deal that Chaos Knights have been surviving off of for the entirety of the edition so far. But what do you get if you swap into this Iconoclast Fiefdom? First off, there's a huge thing here. You unlock units from Codex Chaos Space Marines as allies. You can take damned units. That includes all of the cultists and traitor guardsmen units, so things like accursed cultists, cultist mobs, traitor guardsmen units, traitor enforcers, dark communes. Those are all available to be included in your army, with the restriction that you can only have up to a quarter of your army as that unit type, 500 points in a Strike Force game, and no damned models from your army can be your warlord. Pretty simple. If you do that, you unlock some pretty cool abilities. The Dreaded Masters Detachment rule. The Dreaded Masters Detachment rule gives you 2 abilities depending on what your unit is. Titanic Chaos Knights now project a 9-inch wide aura. 9 inches is pretty big, to be honest, so that's pretty cool. That gives you reroll hits and wounds of 1 for damned units within that aura. So while most damned units are going to be things like cultists that we don't really care about, occasionally you can take things like maybe traitor guardsmen for some shooting, but also dark cursed cultists and dark communes, AC/DC squads, and those things getting rerolls baked in is important. It's also important here, I think, to mention that these do not benefit from Dark Pact. Your faction keyword is Chaos Knights. It is not Chaos Space Marines, so you don't get to make Dark Pact checks with these units. So benefiting their hit rolls and their wound rolls in some other way, because they're going to be missing that sustained or lethal, is very important. And a 9-inch aura is going to be good. It's pretty easy to get that into position when you need to, especially given that Titanic units can now walk through walls with the chance of battle shocking themselves, regardless of whether or not they have Knights of Shade. In addition, Chaos Knight units, this is everything, not just the Titanic units, can sacrifice damned models in order to Dark Pact themselves. So you can't Dark Pact with the cultists, but the cultists essentially can stab themselves to allow the big knights to Dark Pact. This is just so flavorful, it's insane. So here's how this works. Each time a Chaos Knight unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight, it can make a dark sacrifice. If you do, you choose a damned unit within 6 inches. Weird idiosyncrasy here that might get eroded at some point is that this doesn't have to specify it's your damned unit, so you could dark sacrifice enemy accursed cultists. Probably a mistake, but I don't know. Every once in a while you play the mirror match and make some funny stuff happen. The damned unit must take a leadership test. If it's passed, they lose D3 models. If it's failed, however, they lose an additional 3, D3 plus 3 models instead. In either case, you then select either lethal hits or sustained hits, and your Chaos Knight unit has that keyword until the end of that phase. So almost exactly a Dark Pact. The chance of taking mortal wounds on ourselves with a leadership test, we instead automatically inflict casualties to a damned unit nearby, and with the chance of inflicting more if they fail their leadership. So taking high leadership damned units is going to be important. It's also important to remember that these are casualties, not mortal wounds. So we can't do things like shrug it on like our traitor enforcers. We can't put it on a cursed cultist torments, and then just soak it on a feel no pain or a multi-wound model. Instead, you have to destroy the entire model. If you assign the damage to them, they just disappear with no saves allowed whatsoever. So don't do this to your big multi-wound models. They'll just vaporize. Now let's move over to the enhancements, because they have a lot of synergy with these abilities. Profane Altar is a 20-point enhancement. It automatically inflicts the maximum casualties from the Dark Sacrifice effect. However, you get both lethal and sustained hits. Pretty nice, but I do think you're going to run out of cultists really quickly if you take this one. Pave the Way is probably the most interesting one in the detachment. At the start of the Declare Battle Formation step, you select up to 3 damned units from your army. The selected units have the 6-inch scout ability. Importantly, there's no range on this. You don't have to be near them to target them with scout. They just have to be on the battlefield. In fact, you don't even have to be on the battlefield yourself. This is incredibly nice. The big thing is that Dark Commune units, if they are attaching to a Cursed Cultist unit, the Cursed Cultists lose scout. So this gives you the ability to basically have some forward operators, but also push forward some threatening units and take some table space or return them into a safe position so you can preserve your casualties to perform Dark Sacrifices with them later. I love this enhancement. I think it's going to be great, and this is probably almost an auto-include all the time. Tyrant's Banner is a really, really easy one. I think it might be the cheapest enhancement in the game. I don't know if there's any more other 5-point enhancements. I'm sure that there are, but they are very rare. 5 points, and interestingly, this changes the targeting requirements for your Dark Sacrifice. So instead of targeting a damned unit within 6 inches, you target any visible damned unit. Now, in order to target a damned unit with Dark Sacrifice to begin with, you don't have to have line of sight to them. So this actually changes how the targeting works at all. Even if you have a damned unit that's 2 inches away from you, but you can't see them, if you have the Tyrant's Banner equipped, you cannot Dark Sacrifice them. However, if you see someone who's 36 inches away on the other side of the table, you can Dark Sacrifice them. I think this is going to be good for Chaos Knights, especially that want to push super far forward or want to strategic reserve into the opponent's deployment zone or something like that. And then you can run forward your cultists off a corner, off a table edge, and line of sight to them in order to use your Dark Sacrifice that way. And also, it's 5 points, so this is a pretty free roll. Diabolical Resilience is the last one. It's a huge one, 35 points. It gives you a 6+ feel no pain, already pretty good, especially on a big knight. That's why this is so expensive. That's probably 4-ish additional wounds. And you ignore all modifiers to your move characteristics and or any advance or charge rolls made for it. Very expensive, but pretty good. So with that, let's talk about some stratagems for this army. Avenge the Masters is used in any phase. When a Chaos Knights unit from your army is just destroyed, it gives your damned models targeting that unit that destroyed it with an attack lethal hit. Pretty okay. If you have extra CP floating, it might be nice. I think the only thing you're really excited about this on is like, if you can get an Accursed Cultist unit or something into counterpunch that. I don't know how often this is going to be, going to come into play. A lot of times these effects are like wound rerolls or +1 wound or something. Lethal hits is kind of a low return on an effect for losing a Chaos Knight unit, but you can use it when you lose War Dogs and play aggressively with carnivores and stuff like that. So it's fine. Wretched Mass is an interesting one. You can select any one damned unit from your army, excluding a Cursed Cultist that was destroyed. You can use the stratagem even on the unit, even though it was destroyed. It replaces that unit and an identical one into strategic reserve at its starting strength with all its wounds remaining. It cannot be used to return destroyed character units to attached units. Interestingly, I think this does mean that you can use it to return character units independently. It's just specifying they don't come back with their unit, which is, I mean, that's just how the rules work, so that makes sense. So I can't use this on a Cursed Cultist. I think you can use it on their Dark Commune, which actually might be fine. It could be okay. I don't know. Mostly this is going to be used to reinforce the number of cultists you have. It doesn't matter who destroys them. The enemy doesn't have to destroy destroy them, you can just kill them with your Dark Sacrifice and then pay 2 CP and bring them back and then do it again next turn. And I think that's basically how this is going to be used in most situations because you can't use it on those really high value Cursed Cultist units. Soul Hunger is the next one. You use it in the fight phase after a Chaos Knights unit from your army has fought. You target that Chaos Knight unit, and if one or more models were destroyed as a result of its attacks, that unit regains up to D3 lost wounds. If those models were from a battle-shocked unit, you gain D3 plus 2 instead. This is a nice little quality of life one. Just keep your knights topped off as they're going. You can target it on any Chaos Knight unit, so even the big, huge, resilient guys, as long as they're killing people in melee, they can be regenerating. Just gonna be a good way to keep them topped up, especially if you don't want them to be bracketed. Unrestrained Rage is the next one. It's used in your movement phase after a Chaos Knight unit from your army advances or falls back. You target that Chaos Knight unit, and until the end of your turn, your unit is eligible to shoot and to declare a charge in a turn in which it advanced or fall back. This is basically like the equivalent to Knights of Shade in this detachment. You can't go through walls with it. Mostly, you can, in your movement phase, go through walls with big knights and advance with them to get into the fight. So I think that there are a lot of larger knights that had struggled a little bit with their movement characteristic and didn't really want to use Knights of Shade because they would basically already get the effect anyway, and it wasn't really helping them out. They just needed the additional movement, and I think this is a really good kind of compromise between that Knights of Shade that can be used on anything, but has a lesser effect on the larger knights, and this, which combos well with the larger knight's ability to walk through walls to begin with. Or you could use it on the faster things like War Dog Carnivores. Advancing and charging probably allows you to edge around walls and get charges regardless. You also get to fall back and shoot, which allows you to keep going with your blast weapons as well, which is huge. I think this stratagem is incredible. This is the best one in the detachment for sure. It's so flexible. It can be used on almost anything in the army besides the damned units, and yeah, it's amazing. Worthless Chattel is the next one. This one's kind of a meme, I think. But this detachment's very fluff-oriented. It's extremely flavorful. It makes sense that you would include one of these in the army as well. It's used in your shooting phase. You target a damned unit from your army. Enemy units are not considered to be in engagement range of that unit for the purposes of selecting ranged weapon targets. Until the end of the phase, each time an enemy model loses a wound, while the targeted damned unit is engagement range of that enemy on a 4+1 model from the damned unit that you targeted is destroyed after the attacking unit has finished making its attacks. So that's kind of convoluted, but all it allows you to do is fire into melee with your infantry. If you do so, there's a 50-50 chance every time you do a damage that you kill one of your infantry as well. Given how valuable I think the damned models in this detachment are and how little you want them to stay in melee, I don't know how often I would use this. The use cases for this stratagem are incredibly narrow. However, I guess it's nice to have, and like I said, it's incredibly flavorful. Last, and certainly not least, is Preserve the Idols. Just the fluff of this is like so cool. I love the narrative that this detachment's driving, that these are basically like walking effigies of the Chaos Gods, these enormous war machines, and these little brainwashed cultists are all running around and worshiping them. It's so cool. It's even though, the pilots of the knights don't give a shit about these little people, but clearly these little people are worshiping these horrible war machines, which I think it's incredibly grimdark, and it fits the 40k universe perfectly. It's so sick. This stratagem is used in your opponent's movement phase just after an enemy unit ends a normal, advance, or fallback move. You target one Chaos Knight unit from your army that is within 9 inches of the enemy unit. So this is a reactive move, but the targeting is super weird. The reason is that the effect is that you select a damned unit from your army that is not battle shocked, not engaged by enemy units, and is within 6 inches of the target of the stratagem. That damned unit can make a normal move of up to 6, but it must move closer to the enemy unit than when it started. So you have a Chaos Knight up in front. I think the intended use case of this stratagem is that you have a Chaos Knight unit that's up in front. Your opponent's going to move in to charge it. You use the reactive move. On the knight passes the effect to a damned unit next to them, and the damned unit moves in to wrap the attacking enemy unit to ensure that they can't charge the Chaos Knight. There are going to be some situations where this is really impactful. The ability to basically pass the effect to a unit that's like 20 inches away from the moving unit is huge. You just have to entirely stay away from Chaos Knights if you don't want this to trigger, which is super difficult in a Chaos Knights army because that's literally all the army. But you're basically like moving within 9, you're 9 inches away from a Chaos Knight. The Chaos Knight's base is very large, and then it passes the effect 6 inches. You can can use it in some weird ways. You can use it to do things like change objective control. It does have to move closer to the enemy unit, but it doesn't have to move directly closer to the enemy unit. So as long as you are orbiting them and you move a little tiny bit closer, you can do some chicanerous stuff with the... It also is that the unit must end closer, but the models in the unit don't necessarily need to. The distance between units is measured as the closest point of the two closest models. So basically, you measure that at the start of that 6-inch move that the damned unit's making, and then you measure again at the end, and as long as the two closest models are then closer than what they started at, you're totally legal. So you could do something, weird like move the rest of the unit in a different direction and nudge one model slightly closer to the enemy unit, and then you're good. I think this stratagem is incredible, and it's so hard to play around, like I said before, because of its range. As long as there's a damned unit within 6 inches of a Chaos Knight, you have to be constantly wondering about where those guys could go. It's definitely not going to save the Chaos Knights, and I don't even think it's going to particularly save the damned units, but it can do things like add additional threat range to them. If you trigger it late in your movement phase, you can't really counterpunch that damned unit. They're moving closer. Use it to re-engage objective control on objectives. You can use it to block charges. There's a bunch of different stuff you can do with it. Extremely good players are going to use it in insane ways that you're never going to have expected, and they're just going to blow you out with it. This detachment is really cool. It opens up an entirely new avenue of play for Chaos Knights, this kind of combined arms, infantry plus knights build, where the infantry can be fed into the knights to empower them. That's super duper cool. It's definitely not, I don't think, maybe as flexible. At least it doesn't support like the War Dog spam style as well as TacticalTortoise Lance does. However, I do think that it's definitely in the conversation with that detachment. I don't know if it's going to be as powerful, but it definitely is cool, and I think it supports the larger knights even better. So let's build a list with it and see what we can come up with. Okay, so here we are over with our friends in New Recruit, talking about some Iconoclast fiefdom. Now, we're going to get a couple error messages here because we are rocking two separate forces in this in order to unlock the damned units for this army, and this is going to be a pretty straightforward build. First of all, we have two Cerastus Knight Lancers. These guys are fast. They hit super hard in melee. Anything with these big, huge, high impact effect that are most likely going to punch through enemy defenses regardless is going to be benefited by sustained hits. And given the fact that we can sustain hits these guys, that's enormous. They're also very fast, so they can, in the instances where it matters, they can contribute their reroll ones to hit and wound to our faster damned units as well. And the fact that they're fast means that they combo well with the advance and charge stratagem, and with the ability to go through walls anyway, they can close the distance on your target incredibly quickly. They can't charge through walls, which is the one downside of not being in the TacticalTortoise Lance. However, if you are in a situation where your opponent has something exposed, these guys can dive on it. The threat range gets to somewhere around 20 to 24 inches, which is absolutely wild for these big, huge guys. So, two Cerastus Knight Lancers. They also have a baked-in 4+ invulnerable save, so the loss of Diabolic Bulwark doesn't hurt quite as hard because they already have it all the time. We also have a bunch of War Dogs in the list as well. I was originally going to have 3 War Dog Brigands. The list, in my opinion, is missing a little bit of shooting, so I wanted to take more shooting, but it didn't really work with the enhancements. I want to take the Scout enhancement, and I also want to take probably the Tyrant's Banner on one of these guys, one of the Lancers, so that they are able to push super far forward and still perform Dark Sacrifices. So we would end up with 10 points remaining in the list after all that is paid for. Unfortunately, the points didn't quite work out, and I wouldn't quite be able to fit the 3rd Brigand in there if I took it. So I downgraded one to a Huntsman. The Huntsman's okay. It's definitely not nearly as good as a Brigand, but at least it provides you some shooting as well, which is cool. And then moving over to our damned selections, we have a Dark Commune within a Cursed Cultist unit. That's the big beneficiary of that Scout enhancement. These guys can deploy really far forward on the line. If you go first, they can push up into your opponent's space. They can buy yourself a lot of space and block off enemy screens, so they can't stop your Knight Lancers from coming in after them. They also provide you just a ton of ablative models that you can Dark Sacrifice if you need them to. The 10 mutants in the unit don't really do anything, and you also get a bunch of models in the Dark Commune as well The Iconarch, Mind Witch, and Blessed Blades are kind of whatever, so you can use those to fuel the big Chaos Knights too. We then have 2 cultist mobs. These guys are going to be there for utility and also just for sacrificing to the Dark Gods. Then we can pay 2 CP to bring one of those back as well. So we kind of have 3, assuming that we're not using all our CP on other stuff. But like I said, it's a pretty straightforward list. I think that's just generally speaking how Chaos Knights end up working. I'd be interested to see if it ends up being that the more ranged, focused Knights are going to be more effective than things like the Lancers. I do think the ability to advance and shoot is going to be big for them, and the ability to get sustained hits on those guys is huge as well. So you could potentially cut a Lancer for a range-oriented Knight, and then you could either sort of upgrade some of these guys because you've unlocked some points, or take another unit or so of cultists. That could also be good. I've never been particularly impressed with Knight shooting for the most part. However, getting Dark Pacts is kind of a big deal for them, so I don't know. That might be good, especially if we can take the enhancement that lets you get sustained and lethal hits. Maybe shooting thermal cannons or something with all those effects would be pretty nice. But in the interim, I think the Cerastus Lancers definitely have a high upside when it comes to attaching in with these guys. So with that, that's all I have to say about the Iconoclast fiefdom. I love this detachment. I think it's super cool. But let me know down in the comment section what you think about it. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.